5 years ago, long before Pokemon expertly crafted something just decent enough to reignite the tiny flame in our Charmander-shaped hearts, or put the spring back into our spoinks if you prefer that odd mention of death in the Pokedex, I just finished playing Pokemon Ultra Moon for the first time. And as alright as it was, I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed that the coolest area in the entire game was nothing more than a hallway and a staircase. Plus, at the time, people were really starting to feel the hangover effects of a few too many of the same game and wanted something different. So, bada bing, bada easy good idea moment. More Ultra Space. Of course, that's as far as the idea went for quite a while, but eventually, Breath of the Wild released. And like the entire video game industry, Pokemon fans everywhere went, "Oh, do that with our franchise, please."
Breath of the Wild 6.
And so my more Ultra Space idea started to gain a little more solidity. An open world Pokemon game in Ultra Space. Sounds like the perfect mixture of buzzwords and intrigue for an ideal elevator pitch. And at the time I put a lot of thought into how an open world Pokemon game would actually work, but that doesn't matter now. I didn't make this video back then. I'm making this video now. And now I get to skip the incredibly boring specifics of how I think an open world Pokemon game would work because I can just say, look, they did it already. But I'm sure this whole time there's been one main issue in the back of your head, or already spilled across your keyboard in the comments section. Ultra Space isn't the distant past. You can't just plug Ultra Space into Pokemon Legends. It doesn't even have the one main unique aspect of Legends Arceus. Well, almost every part of the story and mechanics of Legends Arceus seems to require a main character from modern times being sent into the distant past. The idea of catching and training Pokemon is a strange new idea. All of the Pokemon around you are either scared of you or violent. The land has been mostly untamed and unexplored, and you are nearly the sole reason that all of that is about to change. The only other way you could possibly meet all these requirements in a sequel would be if it was like Pokemon Legends Celebi, which is the only idea for a sequel I've seen, and don't get me wrong, this is a great idea. It's pretty much the only other way to justify having this exact kind of plot, since Celebi is the only other Pokemon with any time-traveling capabilities left. However, the idea is incredibly straightforward. I'm sure many people have explored what it could be like already, and it wouldn't be too difficult to imagine what it'd be like yourself just based on its name. So how did I jam Ultra Space into this formula? Well, just because this is a Pokemon game doesn't mean that we have to stick to making the same story again. So acting like time travel is the only way to justify these mechanics is just foolish enough that there's a good chance nobody has ever thought that, and I just made up an argument simply to disagree with it. But my point is, all of these boxes can be checked by simply taking a setting where catching wild Pokemon isn't really a thing, and then introducing the normal Pokemon training culture into it, which works perfectly with a setting like the Wild West. But it also works really well for Ultra Space. As we've seen from the Ultra Recon squad, catching Pokemon isn't a thing in Ultra Space, and meeting Alolan has introduced the concept to them, which allows for us to have all the same major story beats and mechanics as Legends Arceus. Though, speaking of mechanics, so we're gonna take the whole open world thing, obviously. Crafting. We're surviving in the wild, we gotta craft things. Agile and strong style attacks. This was a pretty major unique mechanic for Legends Arceus, so of course we're keeping that around. Space-time distortions, except drop the time part because it's just space rifts to Alola to give you completely normal Pokemon that wouldn't be here otherwise. Moving during battles, I don't have any particular reason, it's just cool and why not? No IVs and simplified EVs. This was a great change. I shouldn't need a theoretical degree in physics just to make sure that I can achieve something Joey did a decade ago. No abilities. This makes extra sense here because every single Ultra Beast has the same weird ability. They were basically already showing that Ultra Beasts don't have abilities in the same way that Pokemon do, so it's easy to justify keeping this feature from Arceus. Let's just say if I don't explicitly mention a mechanic or system or whatever from Arceus, then assume that I like it and it's in here by default. I'm not gonna go through and mention every single one, unless there'd be some big issue with it, like with Ancestors. This game is set in the modern era and not the dinosaur times, so you can't have literal ancestors to existing characters, but we know that there's Ultra Space worlds that are kinda just altered versions of the Pokemon world, so you could justify having Ultra Space characters that look like Pokemon characters. Lookalikes, if you will. However, there's something very key that I'm not taking so directly from Arceus. Well, actually, two things, but the first one is movement.
Yeah! Pretty badass, right?
I really like the dodge roll, that's great and fun, but I'm not a huge fan of unlockable movement abilities. To me, things like swimming and climbing seem so natural and important to the fun of exploring an open world that I'm a little sad they keep getting locked away from us until later in the game. Unlocking upgrades to these abilities makes perfect sense, and I will suggest some of those later, but hiding away the abilities themselves behind a vertically stretched Sneasel seems a lot less enjoyable. Just slap on a stamina bar and send us on our merry way. The other and significantly larger thing that I'll be adjusting from Arceus is the way that it handled In Legends Arceus, the game was pseudo-open world because there were big, massive open areas that were all separate, and while there wasn't really a good story justification for this in Arceus, here in Ultra Space, every location is quite literally a separate dimension, so it would make much more sense to carry that same system over. However, I'd like for you to consider that'd be lame. Though making a fully connected world out of all the separate Ultra Space dimensions doesn't necessarily make sense with how these dimensions work in Sun and Moon, I invoke the rule of it'd be cool and say that it's all connected anyway. It'd be one massive floating island with a few smaller ones around the edge like some of the worlds we've seen in the anime. Right in the middle is our starting point, Ultra Megalopolis. Surrounding the Megalopolis is the wild, untamed wilds. Out here, there's a few stray cities dotted about that act as safe havens from the dangerous outside. Think like Fallout, but blue instead of brown. Of course, all of this land isn't just the same boring grass that you could go out and touch if you weren't busy playing the game. All of the other dimensions we've seen before will get incorporated here as big special biomes, like a weird Minecraft custom map. And they'd all be slightly adjusted to match the vague alien blue aesthetic that we've been going for so far. The deep sea would be on the strayed, smaller islands all around the outer edge of the main island. The jungle and forest would be combined into one big, lush, foresty area. The desert doesn't really need to change visually, just have that be some chunk of the island. Same with the power plant. It wouldn't be a big biome, but it could be just part of some more dangerous city somewhere. The crater could be another chunk of the main island and have to also be more blue shifted. And lastly, the ruins would be like all the other cities around, except that this one is torn apart and ruined. And of course, these would all be nighted by darkness because there's no sun here. They can't be quite as dark as you would expect a place with no sun to be, since you still have to see, so it'd be dim everywhere, with the cities acting like beacons of light to guide you through the cold, unforgiving wasteland. A wasteland populated by... Now, I've been trying to remove the word Ultra as much as I can so far, because having a full game where everything feels the need to be labeled as Ultra would get tiring very quickly. And let's be honest, it's getting a little tiring just in this video. But I do want to keep the word Ultra around for Ultra Beasts. Well, for some of them at least. I think it'd be quite neat to have an overarching category of just simply beasts with different tiers to represent the power and or importance. Ultra would be the equivalent of legendary, and then pseudo-legendaries could be like great or super. But also, I'm kind of already cringing at the fact that I've essentially just suggested to you that the Pokemon Company start calling Pokemon beasts. That's teetering a bit too close to the level of you should be able to join the evil team and abuse Pokemon kind of edgy idea, which I really want to avoid here. So while I think that a multi-tiered caste system would be some interesting spice to the categorization of my imprisoned animals, I'm just gonna stick to calling Pokemon Pokemon and Ultra Beasts Ultra Beasts. Ideally, the world would be populated by a whole cascade of wacky new Ultra Beasts and little to no Pokemon at all, but that's essentially asking a design team to make roughly 100 new designs for the spin-off title. Up until Legends Arceus, the only thing spin-offs would get is an evil version of an existing legendary Pokemon. Arceus showed that we can get brand new designs that can even exist outside of this single spin-off. This means I get to cash in these new designs for at least like 2 or 3 new Ultra Beasts, a few regional variants, and maybe a couple evolutions for those regional variants. As for everything else, having just normal old Pokemon around is justified, as we've seen plenty of times that Ultra Beasts aren't the only things in these alternate dimensions, but I'd kinda like to flex the old "it'd be cool" rule again from earlier, because I think it'd be incredibly interesting if you took all of the standard Pokemon in this game and swapped their normal colors with their shiny colors. I have no idea how that'd work if you could trade with other games, but ignoring that issue, consider how much more alien this world would feel if even the Rattata you see would be different in some way. It'd also be hilarious to see a completely normal colored Pokemon and get hyped over it because it sparkled. Of course, this would only apply to the Pokemon you'd find in the natural environment. The Pokemon you get from the space rifts that occasionally pop up wouldn't have their colors swapped, but that probably also feels special at this point, just because it's something familiar. Now that we spent a good half of the video not talking about it, I think it's about time we actually bring up the part of this idea that has anything to do with Necrozma. The story doesn't need to be super complex or intense. We're not writing the next Final Fantasy here, and we really shouldn't be. As much as I enjoyed Gen 5, I know full well that a Pokemon game like this is at its best when its story is mostly a fancy guideline telling you where to go adventure. You live in the Megalopolis, and recently some kid from another dimension with far too much protagonistic energy came in and completely obliterated your world's god of light. Of course, this kind of screws up the entire mission of your species to bring light back to your world, though that was never going to be a particularly easy thing to do. Thankfully, however, this cultural cross-pollination between the nation of Alola and your homely, desolate alien wasteland has not been stopped just because the original games failed to even slightly explain any of the lasting impacts of such a major event. In fact, these days, kids like you enjoy trying out this brand new idea of catching things. This is mostly for fun, but already the gross smart people have tried to turn your fun pastime into something that could possibly benefit your society and bring us valuable knowledge, or whatever. And most of this is overseen by the Aether Foundation. Yes, it's just them. Obviously, it's just them. They've always been the main Alolan contact with Ultra Space, though they are now reformed, restructured, and refocused on their original goal of helping Pokemon. They're here to research Ultra Beasts, so they want anybody going out and catching Pokemon in the wild to help gather some of that data for them, like your classic Pokemon professor. This means that the Pokedex works just like it did in Arceus, including the missions. But if the Aether Foundation's only there to gather data you collect, then who's helping teach people about the ways to catch Pokemon in the first place? The Sun Recon Squad. That's right, clans are back from Legends Arceus. The semi-rivals, semi-gym leaders, and mostly reference back to the original mainline game titles. Sun Squad here is comprised of 6 quirky individuals who are all very adamant on bringing over Alolan customs and traditions. To aid with this sentiment, they've chosen to make an Alolan be their captain of the squad. The captain acts as your Adaman or Irida, serving as the main representation for the squad and most direct rival to you as a player. These lovely fellows will be the ones telling you that you can throw Pokeballs at a Pokemon to catch it for the 100th time in your life. But they'll also tell you about how more dangerous Pokemon can be calmed down with berries to make catching them easier. And they'll teach you that there's Pokemon that are so dangerous that you'll die if you approach them. So please don't. But of course, there's also the Moon Recon Squad. Sun Squad has tried to claim every new Pokemon trainer popping up in the Megalopolis, since, you know, that's kind of an Alolan tradition, not an Ultra Space one. But you're not Alolan, you're Ultra-Onian, or something like that. And just because you can join the Shining Loser Brigade, doesn't mean that you should. Moon Squad here is comprised of 6 quirky individuals who are all very adamant on graciously accepting the gift of catching and training Pokemon, and using that gift to actually help solve the issues facing the Megalopolis. Like, you know, all the dangerous wild Pokemon running around, or the fact that there's still no natural light. These lovely fellows will be the ones telling you about all the open world mechanics in this game. They'll teach you about stamina and crafting. They'll also show you that while running away from danger might be safer, fighting danger head-on is probably cooler. The members of each squad could be any combination of completely new characters, lookalikes, and old characters from Sun and Moon. Admittedly, I don't want to overuse the cameo casting card for nostalgic character reappearances. Having every old character that could show up play a role here would make the cameos significantly less special. I'm sure any modern Pokemon fan is familiar with this exact type of oversaturation. Plus, we already have new characters who reference old ones, so I'd ideally cut down on the number of direct cameos. Having said that, I have all the Ultra Recon squad members here because I didn't want to design an insane amount of new characters, even though I kinda did that anyway. Both squads will likely spend the whole game bickering over which side you should join, but ultimately you'll be helping both of them deal with some landmark issues at each landmark of this world map. These will act like the noble fights from Arceus, but instead of being a set list of things to do in a specific order, they're much more like the Titans from Scarlet and Violet, serving as the slight suggestion of something to do while you're wandering aimlessly through the vast open world. So, unlike in Arceus, you'll be able to do these in any order you want, but unlike in Scarlet and Violet, these trials will actually account for that. Everybody on the planet has said this already, so I won't harp on about it, but it should be pretty obvious that if the player can do these fights in any order, then the difficulty of these fights should scale based on how many they already did. At each of these spots will be one member of either squad who will give you the rundown on the issue and help try to solve it with you. In general, Sun Squad will have you solve things more passively. Typically, you'll have to calm down the Ultra Beast in question and then catch it. Like, there's an angry swarm of Nihilego and you need to find some special food to give them. Or, Kartana has been too hyperactive lately and you'll have to go recruit some local Pokemon who can help contain him. As for Moon Squad, an alpha circuitry has been causing all the other circuitry to start acting violent. Go fight him. Stakataka is terrorizing a town. Find which house is him and fight him. After each of these challenges, you'll be rewarded with a Z Crystal or Necrozma shard or whatever they choose to call it. These act like the plates did in Legends Arceus, serving both their original purpose and their new purpose of summoning the wacky guy who's featured in the name of this whole thing once you get them all. But let's not jump ahead too much. As you do these missions, you'll most likely be ranking up in the Aether Foundation. But if all these challenges are available from the start and all the areas are connected, then what are you unlocking by ranking up? Well, first, you could still unlock some of the more dangerous areas as rank rewards. I don't have a particular preference with this, so I won't say for certain, but it's definitely an option. But secondly, and far more concretely, at around rank 7 or 8, you unlock access to the 5th mission for each squad. This is a simple and straightforward Pokemon battle against the second-in-command of each respective squad. This also requires that you've cleared all the prior missions for a squad before you can do this, so this battle won't need any kind of dynamic scaling, really. Once you beat them in a battle though, you'll unlock the ability to use Solgaleo, or Lunala, depending on which fight it was. You don't have to choose, you can unlock them both, so don't worry. But these aren't used for battle. These are the only upgrades to your movement in the whole game. Solgaleo lets you run faster, climb faster, and run over water, all without having to use stamina. And Lunala is Braviary. I think that having a ride Pokemon that allows you to do everything on the ground quicker and without using stamina is about equal to a ride that lets you fly. Although I still think people would gun for Lunala first. After completing all missions and getting to rank 10, you're finally able to take on the final challenge, Guzzlord. Okay, obviously this isn't the final challenge, there's still like Necrozma around, but whatever, this is the Giratina fight of the game. Except there's no completely expected betrayal from an immortal deity representing your nightmares from when you were 10.
Is that piano I hear?
Instead, both captains will be here to help you with your final mission. They're finally working together because Guzzlord is an Ultra Beast who canonically would have already destroyed this entire dimension by now if we were being completely accurate. But shush, don't worry about that. Look, he's isolated, so it's fine. In the end, you have to contain and subdue him with the help of the Sun Captain, and then fight him with the help of the Moon Captain. Once weakened, you can catch him, bring him back to the Aether Foundation, and get a sick, lukewarm reward. As part of the post-game, you'll be able to hop in a wormhole to a small isolated section of Alola. There, you'll find Necrozma, who you get to fight as a big final boss. This won't be your reward for completing the Pokedex like it was with Arceus. I mean, I don't know what would be your reward otherwise, but it feels like you should be able to get Necrozma before completing everything else, because otherwise you couldn't really make use of his epic bonus. That bonus being that you can combine him with Solgaleo and Lunala to give them big boosts to their speed, helping you travel across the world even easier. Besides all of that, there's a few other small ideas you could throw into this stew. As I mentioned earlier, explicit cameos should be limited in quantity, but a few possible options could be like Lily, Gladion, Lusamine, Annabelle, Looker, Colress. He was involved with Ultra Space for some reason. Also, since there's a whole lot of alternate dimension stuff going on here, you could easily put the Distortion world in here somewhere if you really want to do even more Gen 4 content. And lastly, maybe voice acting this time, please? That's probably the most unlikely request I've made yet, because Pokemon would rather do this than have voice actors, but I can still hope. Anyway, that's all the time I've got. I have to get back to playing Pokemon Ultra Moon on my Nintendo 3DS.